Fintech is usually a software story, but today I want to talk about hardware, the cloud. Fintech and digital finance would not exist without the cloud. These hyperscalers have made it possible for banks and insurance companies and tech companies to outsource the computation and storage of their data, which allows them in turn to do things much more quickly and sophisticated. They can scale up their use, scale it down, go to market much quicker. It's been amazing. But cloud also brings a growing set of costs and vulnerabilities. Even the largest bank in the world is now dependent on a handful of hyperscalers for keeping the lights on. The costs of computing have escalated. The technical debt, as you become dependent on these handful of companies, becomes great. Your flexibility is reduced. And if there's an outage or a missile strike on a data center, you can be out of luck. Finally, in today's tense geopolitical environment, for many countries and companies, it is no longer seen as acceptable to be completely dependent on the digital infrastructure of either the US or China. This has everyone looking for new solutions. With me to discuss all of this is David Gurlé. David is a serial entrepreneur. Many in financial services will know him as the founder of Symphony, which became the Bloomberg competitor on chat and communications for trading desks. He runs two businesses today that are relevant to our discussion. First is PolyCloud, which operates data centers all over the world. And second is HiveNet, which is really the transmission. It's a distributed means of moving that cloud connectivity around. And if you find this program and this discussion useful, I'd love to hear about it. Please leave a comment. Tell me what you like, what you didn't, or if you've got a question that we can pass on to David. And of course, support the program by making us more visible to all the algorithms, like, share, subscribe. My name is Jame DiBiasio, and this is my report. David Gurlé, welcome to the JDB report.
Hi, Jame. Thanks for having me.
So normally I speak with people in digital banking or fintech or crypto, and so inevitably we're talking software. But today with you, I want to talk about hardware because that's where you play. You've done software, you've done a lot of entrepreneurial work in trading desk communications and so on. But what led you from working in a project like Symphony into going into looking at data centers, cloud, and rethinking what that means for users in finance and beyond?
Well, Jame, actually, believe it or not, the idea started when I was at Symphony, building the communication software you just talked about. But as we were building that stack, we were using AWS and we were also using Google.
Mhm.
And we've seen over the years, of around 2018, that our cloud bills were doubling every year. And around 2018, it was around $11 million, if I remember correctly, in between the two cloud providers for an actual usage of about 5% of what we were renting.
Okay.
So I really felt that there was a massive waste and huge amount of money that was spent. And I was wondering whether there was a more efficient way, more effective way of building a cloud than using those large scale hyperscalers that
Yeah.
existed back then.
And can I just ask
And
you, David, in your estimation or your analysis, those high costs affect everyone, of course. Everyone is
yes.
impacted by those. Um, there's the flexibility that cloud brings, but then the costs have gone up. The reasons for that is it just due to oligopoly, or are there real structural issues that would make it difficult for anyone to receive a cheaper service in general terms?
Actually, it's a drug issue. So the way it works is that the clouds win you on flexibility. You say, oh, okay, I just go and rent something And then if I need it, I can take it down. And if I don't, I can increase. So you have the flexibility and you don't have to pay the capex for it.
Right.
And so these two angles are very good. And then traditionally people will go and install, Windows or their own stack, Linux or open source stack, and then things run. And progressively, the cloud providers have built up their native cloud services. And that's where we start going into the north of the hemisphere in terms of cost. And suddenly you abandon your open source stack and switch to one of their native stacks. And when you do that, you are paying a higher software cost, and they know that because that's how they want to distinguish themselves. So that's how they want to lock you in. So that comes to first structural issue.
Okay.
Okay. And then from there, since you cannot delete what you've stored, and you have to take data out of where you put, and so you are paying for more and more storage, and you are paying for more and more data because the egress is how they make money, and then you are paying for more and more proprietary services. So the entire cloud model that originally has been around, hey, let us save you money and you can be flexible, has become a complete opposite. And you have no more flexibility because that's gone. You are 100% dependent on them, so you have no independence. That's gone. And then it becomes an accumulated compound growth. So in other words, oh, I'm not going to use what I have used the last 3 years, so let's erase all of it. This doesn't work in this world of information, and you want to keep data there forever. And so this accumulates, and with that, the volume increases. With the volume, the money, the cost increases, and all of that becomes a major impediment for you to walk away
Right.
from these cloud providers.
Okay. So it's
And
not that you're locked in, but you're compounding your technical debt.
Exactly. And you know what happens, and which is a very good point. You have engineering debt as well. And so people that you hire are now specialists in running native AWS and Google software, no longer specialists in running open source stacks.
Right.
And then people, you don't hire SREs anymore. You are not doing DevOps as you used to anymore. And then suddenly you are losing the the intelligence and the experience and the skills on the low end of the application stack. And then suddenly the team that you had who was running all of that is gone. And so everybody has become an application developer. And you have nobody on the infrastructure layer. And then from there, the trap is set and done, and the game is over.
Right.
And so the trend is reversing now, interestingly, James, because big companies have realized which trap they are in and how it affects their bottom line because it's a huge, huge sunk cost. And so there is, bringing back computes and data from the hyperscalers back home, and they are doing the math, and the math is certainly to their advantage.
Right. But they're not just doing it by going back to traditional on-prem where they've got some mainframes in different offices around the world.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. Yes, they are trying to, some of them have data centers, so they are saying, okay, why don't we use those data centers that we had invested in, and reversing a little bit of the trend that they've been taking everything out. So there is a little bit of that. But there is also, okay, we now live in the era of AI, and we're going to talk about that. But those data centers are not suitable with this type of workload because they are not powered in the right way.
Okay.
And so they have to find alternatives. And that's where the neo clouds come in and etc. But fundamentally, the trend of let's go to the cloud
Mhm.
has now become let's bring the cloud back home.
What is the trade-off though? Because yes, we've talked about the costs and some of the issues and perhaps some of the deterioration of your in-house people's skills around infrastructure and architecting. At the same time, though, there's a convenience, there's a simplicity, and there's regulatory comfort because the regulators are like, okay, if it's AWS or Google or if And the same could be if you're a Chinese player, if it's Alibaba Cloud or Huawei, whatever. You're in a very comfortable position. You don't have to worry about getting, you're not going to get fired because you use one of these guys, right? So how do you see that argument playing out? Is this something that people ask you about? Maybe it's a surcharge for in a very uncertain, volatile world. At least this is kind of a known issue. It's something they can kind of count on.
So there are two aspects to your question. The first one is, what's the long-term impact on bringing back the cloud home? So, and how does have, if any, if that's successful, effect on our regulatory matters? Um, Number one is that actually, in the long run, if you have that asset
Hmm.
and you use the modern infrastructure software,
Hmm.
which didn't exist 20 years ago, um, you have a very advantageous, flexible infrastructure that you can manage and deploy very, very fast.
Okay.
Yes, you have a hardware cost, but you can amortize that in your balance sheet. And so that becomes that offsets against your profits. So you have some tax benefits. So you can financially manufacture a very advantageous way of bringing this home. And then what you are gaining is certainly against a short-term pain because you have to ramp up your investment and that cost of bringing it back. But over the long term, you are saving money, number one, a massive amount of money, because you are no longer subject to those taxes that you pay with those cloud providers. And then you are independent. So, in other words, you can always have a dual strategy because once you master your software stack for your application and you run it, in your cloud, you can say, okay, you know what, I have found a better alternative, for some part of that, and I'm going to move it there. And so you can have this dual cloud strategy in which you play the arbitrage of pain versus cost. And so that I think is certainly understood by the CIOs of financial services and they are realizing the benefits they can gain. Now, let's come to regulatory aspects. One is around compliance, the other one is around sovereignty.
Right.
And this is where we have a problem.
Okay.
First of all, compliance, you already have your IT infrastructure, so you have to be compliant no matter what. You had to go back to the regulator with all the reportings and all the audits that they perform on your infrastructure. So you are not really creating some additional cost that you already have received, in terms of your previous investments. And so I don't see that to be a challenge. But the real benefit is sovereignty. If you are a European institution and you are under sovereignty rules, you don't want to be on Google, you don't want to be on Azure, you don't want to be on AWS due to the US Cloud Act. Now, the French regulators, the European regulators are forcing through their own regulation people out of these clouds.
Hmm.
And where they're going to go? Either they are going to a local regional cloud, or they are saying, okay, maybe it's an opportunity for us to bring it home. And so it's actually an advantage against I would say, against the hyperscalers, all these regulations, because it is far easier, far less complex to do it at home, and you gain sovereignty on top of that.
What about data sovereignty laws, which have been around for a while, but in places like India, Indonesia, many markets have laws like this now. Um, is this a factor in terms of trying to do more locally, or
Oh yeah, I mean, it is by far the number one factor. If I were to put a coefficient in front of that decision criteria, 1 out of 10, that would be 10. And that's because of the way that American administration and American policies have affected this country's geopolitical assessment of the risks.
Mhm.
And they realize that the world is becoming more digital every day, and that means that data that is stored and data that is owned is actually an asset, a critical asset, a mission critical asset that cannot be subject to somebody else's territorial laws. And as a result of that, they are imposing those data sovereignty rules. India is a very good example, but India is not the only one. Pretty much every country is going through exactly the same data sovereignty rules that we are seeing these days everywhere.
Regulators are keen for the sovereignty question, but they tend to be pretty conservative when it comes to using new architectures, new infrastructures. Where's your business when you deal with enterprises, particularly in the finance sector, with that sort of comfort level of doing something new and I don't know if untested is the right word, but let's say new to them.
It's always a challenge if you are not putting them in the loop from the beginning. And what I have found is that regulators are as human as anyone else, to begin with. They are not hiding behind laws. Their job is obviously to provide a fair market for everyone to play, and any threat that they perceive against that mission of theirs becomes a blocking factor if they are not aware of it. So I work with regulators all around the world, and my approach has always been they are part of the solution as opposed to be a problem that we have to deal with. And if you bring them on board in the very early days of whatever new technology you are embracing and you're about to implement, and you explain to them what it is, actually it works to your benefit, Jane, because first of all, they're going to know what you're talking about. Otherwise, they will have to be going through a very steep learning curve. And second is that they're going to see all the progress you are making over time, because it takes time to build up whatever new you are working on.
You know,
Next is that they're going to tell you their requirements from the get-go. And they're going to tell you, okay, for this to work, actually, you need to do this. And so you better know those requirements far earlier on so you can integrate it into your product lifecycle than, shipping something and then, being hit on your hand because you've done something wrong.
but
And
but
then
I,
you have to
but
read.
David, I've heard that about all kinds of different solutions.
Yeah.
Whether it's a KYC solution or it's using a stable coin or whatever. Um, with with cloud, whether it's distributed, sort of like the grid distribution or the
Approach.
data center localization. This is still, I think, if correct me, you tell me if I'm wrong. I think it's still a fairly niche business compared to the hyperscalers at this stage.
Yes. Oh,
So
yeah.
we've had cost runs, we've had outages that, if they hit one of the big three, it messes everybody up for a day or two. We've had war, our Iranian missiles targeting data centers in the Middle East. Um,
Yep.
what and yet we're still kind of it seems to me that the conversation the day to day is still around just working with the same old group of hyperscalers. So what do you think will really move the needle? We already had a lot of dramatic things. So what will probably lead to that change?
I think, first of all, the inertia is real. I think you're right to point out that we still work with clouds and people still make money and they are still they are still growing their revenue. Um, but the change that we are talking about is already happening, and the mindset of people realizing the risks at stake by using these hyperscalers is already over. They have already made their decision. Now it's a question of how quickly they can implement it and without disrupting their day-to-day operations. And in the core of it, this isn't going to be a world in which there will be no hyperscaler. That's not what we are talking about. It is going to be a world in which the excess of use of hyperscaler infrastructure is going to evaporate to the benefit of having a sovereign cloud infrastructure that these corporations of any size can own and control and then master, their cost and create an independence. So that's what I call is that the swing isn't going to go from here to here, but we're going to go from here to here. And um,
In the
and and we
middle.
are finally erasing that excess that happened over the last 10 years. I think and finding the balance of the market in a hybrid universe.
Yeah.
And that the game on that one is over. It is happening as we speak.
So let's talk, if I may, about financial services, banking, investing, insurance, as well as crypto. Um, where, when let's say 8 or 9 years ago, when I began writing about people moving off-prem into public cloud, it wasn't a dive in whole body. It was dip a toe first. Certain things migrated, certain core things did not. But if we're going to go in the reverse, what will be some of the use cases or the areas in financial services that will probably be easiest to move into a distributed or local model, and what will probably have to remain with the hyperscalers because it'll be too hard to move or for whatever reason?
Yeah, I always think about a matrix of elasticity
Mhm.
versus mission critical. So there are workloads and data. For example, imagine you have a staging environment or you have a test environment. You have pre-product validation environment, and it might be really worthwhile to move those workloads, into the cloud because it's a sporadic, elastic kind of workload. It goes on and off and on and off. Having that flexibility gives you some things that could be very onerous to have on your own.
Okay.
So, so if that's what, if it's not mission critical and it's very elastic, and then it might be worthwhile, using the cloud for it, cost aside. But if it is mission critical, where you have sovereignty, where you have to really pay attention to the ownership of that, and you want to control your own destiny, and that's very, very important, is that no matter what, the destiny is under your control, and you are never subject to somebody else's goodwill or somebody else's regulation, then this is a very good criteria to bring this home. And because your business depends on it, your customers' business depend on it, and that's something that you really have to run very effectively. And so I think in that regard, the matrix is relatively easy to set up and then put the dots where you want to be for your data and applications. And that's what I mean by hybrid cloud strategy. And so you don't have to be, either. You can be both. You just have to pick very carefully what fits where. And then you bring back the knowledge that you lost in your IT infrastructure, in your IT knowledge.
In the old days, maybe even before Symphony, uh, big firms would have their data centers on-prem. They'd have, in different locations. But then when it came to co-location, the big play was I want my server right next to the stock exchange's server because I'm doing high frequency trading, or I need that super low latency to beat everybody else in the marketplace. So I think when I think of my own little server, that to me I think was sort of an early example of this. Um, and you know trading desk technology extremely well. Is Are there lessons from what the high frequency traders were doing, 15 years ago for use cases today? Is Colo going to make a comeback, but maybe not just for trading stocks, but perhaps for other things?
I think anything that has a very low latency requirement, could be an AI inference engine, needing to get its research super fast and super quickly to an algorithm that's going to make a trading decision. Yes, the co-location strategy, maybe I'm going to exaggerate, but even under the desk,
Hmm.
for a model that works on a workstation would be really far more beneficial than anything that is sitting 200 milliseconds away. And so the traders are extremely, extremely opportunistic when it comes to such arbitrage options. So they will always take the best,
Yeah.
and because it's an advantage for them. So I don't expect anything to change other than the co-location workloads are going to move from trading to AI machines,
Okay.
and from AI machines to AI inference, and so. if not already happening. So, in my view, the future for this type of data centers are bright. They are not going to evaporate, unless the market structure changes for whatever reason.
Yeah. Because where it's financial services have become so digitized that it's not just the very sophisticated end of capital markets trading. It's also I need a client onboarding done in seconds. My competitive advantage is how quickly can I do a KYC or an AML check on someone,
Yeah.
or how quickly can I get a micropayment done? So I feel like there will be that this idea of speed is necessary. And it was one of the drivers of adopting cloud because cloud enabled this kind of speed in a way that you couldn't have done. Fintech probably wouldn't exist as we know it without cloud.
Correct.
But if it begins to distribute and break down, I'm just curious if you have yet to see clients or prospects that are looking at different kinds of use cases beyond just transacting, stocks and derivatives.
Well, I mean, essentially, there are a huge range of what you call database managed services. As you know, this world lives on data of all forms, of all shapes, and from all directions. And I would say, the core of it is a set of databases. And I think the use case around where this database is located, and again, here we are talking about sovereignty matters. Okay, what is good for Singapore is not good for Turkey, which is not good for India, right? And how do they manage that very complex sovereignty of data across all the databases of all the customers that they have to deal with? You are talking about AML, but AML in India is different than AML in Singapore, which is different than AML in China. And all of these are complexities that these companies have to deal with, and it's the core of it.
Yeah.
And I don't think I think we really underestimate how complex the life of data compliance people are, given especially for multinational companies.
Yeah. And in the crypto world, the whole ethos there, not necessarily practiced, is decentralization. So
Yeah.
you've got a twin business, both you decentralize the way that the data moves around, as
Yeah.
well as then you have the business of the data centers themselves. Um, do you get interest from crypto, Web3, digital asset type of customers? Are they looking at this? Is
Yeah.
there kind of a use case for them?
They are. Essentially, I wouldn't say in the pure crypto world, but blockchain world.
Hmm.
Yes. Because it's the far more efficient way of computing this way, especially when you bring the cost factor into the mix.
Right.
And any distributed network properly designed can deliver a much better resilience at a reasonable performance. It's not the same as collocating everything under your desk, right?
Yeah.
Um, there are always network budgets involved in distributed infrastructure systems. But if you find an acceptable workload with that latency that works, and on blockchain it works,
Mhm.
then obviously we are a very good match, and we are a very good match for this type of workloads.
What parts of what you're doing will be most relevant for agentic AI? Are the data centers being built for purpose for that, or do they have to be built from scratch? Can they be repurposed, or what does the economics look like when you move from a hyperscaler to an independent alternative source of hardware and getting that storage and compute done?
Well, it's true that this trend is there, and everything you said about agentic world is true all around the industries. I believe, though, that in finance it must be one of the most acute ones. As it comes to repurposing your data center, or all the things that we've seen from CoreWeave to others, it's there's only one word that matters: is energy.
Hmm.
Do you have the power? If enough energy is to power the new servers and the racks that put your servers, when when they ask 100 kilowatt in total, right? And that's where the limit is to begin with. And then the second one is around cooling. Is your infrastructure capable of cooling down these machines, or you can put the liquid cooling equipment in order to cope with the heat that's being generated. I would say that most data centers are not capable of catering for that. Most traditional ways are not catering. Or it will require a massive core infrastructure investment, at the cost of losing some density that you had for your servers.
Right.
So there is. I think that's one of the core reasons why the neo clouds are emerging, because they came, or wherever they came from. If they came from the Bitcoin world, well, they had energy, right? These guys went for cheapest of the energy farms, and they built an infrastructure that's catering, to running all these ASIC machines, which are, very power hungry, very, very power hungry, and but which are interruptible. So that really created an interesting challenge for the migrate, for the pivoting of these companies. But fundamentally, it was all about who owns the energy to provide the racks, the power it's needed to run, AI learning and inference workloads. So it is interesting to see that hyperscalers cannot cope with that,
Hmm.
and that they rely on neoclouds to provide for their own use
Mm.
all this AI equipment, and that is because of these limitations.
Yeah.
And today, the growth of AI is curtailed, massively curtailed by the energy and the connectivity of that energy to the grid. If you
So,
see the
yeah.
token price going like that, that is because of this.
Okay. So why don't we wrap up, David? Thanks for your time.
My
Why don't you
pleasure.
just give us a quick primer on PolyCloud and HiveNet and how they interrupt with one another, and also the green aspect of what you're doing and trying to generate a more sustainable footprint in on the energy front.
Well, I'll start with PolyCloud. PolyCloud is a micro data center that is equipped with the high-end inference machine for open source models. And the characteristic of a polycloud is that it's modular and portable. It is within a 20 to 40 foot maritime container. And because it's portable and small footprint, you can take it to where the electron is already available, as opposed to be building a huge data center and bringing energy to it. So the ability to go and connect to where these energy spots are available makes this decentralized network of polyclouds a very valuable resource. Um, Not only thanks to sovereignty and frugality of its consumption of energy and no water, but also the fact that you are close to the edge and provide a much faster RTT for all of the inference workloads. And HiveNet is the software that makes it possible. It interconnects all these polyclouds together to its distributed operating platform, and then offers storage, CPU, and GPU compute services so that people can run, all of their high performance computing workloads on it. And this has been I would say, a formidable adventure for us. And we are now in the scale up phase of our business. We're going to bring over the next 18 months over 40,000 GPUs to market, to support the growth of AI inference as we see coming from everywhere, from every direction.
Right. Well, good luck, and thanks, David, for joining me on the JDB report.
Jame, thanks for having me, and great conversation.